The air, thick with the humidity of a Georgia summer, crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with the impending storm. Flashing blue and red lights painted streaks of panic across the quiet suburban street, each pulse a heartbeat of a crisis unfolding. At the epicenter of this chaos stood Sergeant Evelyn Reed, her hands held high, the smooth, cool metal of her service pistol a stark contrast to the familiar, worn fabric of her army fatigues. Her voice, trained to cut through the din of battle, was steady, but laced with a note of incredulous frustration. "I am a decorated military veteran," she stated, her words slicing through the charged atmosphere. "I have served this country for 12 years. I am on my own property. And I am not a threat." But the semicircle of police officers tightening around her didn't seem to hear. Their faces were a mixture of apprehension and grim determination, their own weapons drawn and leveled at her. It was a standoff born from a misunderstanding, a volatile cocktail of fear, prejudice, and miscommunication. But as the seconds stretched into an eternity, and the situation teetered on the brink of tragedy, an unexpected element emerged from the shadows of Evelyn's home. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a sudden act of aggression. It was the low, rumbling growl of something ancient and powerful, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the officers present. And then, they appeared. Two colossal figures, moving with a silent, coordinated grace that belied their immense size. They weren't just dogs. They were titans, and they were about to take the lead. What happens when the protectors become the perceived threat? And who protects them in turn? The story of Sergeant Evelyn Reed is a stark reminder that appearances can be dangerously deceiving. To ensure you don't miss out on more stories like this, stories that challenge our perceptions and reveal the extraordinary in the everyday, make sure you subscribe to our channel. The truth is often more complex than it seems, and you'll want to be here as we continue to uncover it. Evelyn Reed was a woman forged in the crucible of conflict. She had spent over a decade in the United States Army, serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. She was a logistics expert, a leader, a soldier who understood the intricate dance of supply and demand in the most hostile environments on Earth. Her mind was a fortress of discipline and order, her spirit unyielding. When she finally returned to civilian life, she sought not solace in the hustle and bustle of a big city, but the quiet rhythm of a small town in Georgia. She bought a modest house with a large, overgrown yard, a place where she could finally put down roots, a place where the loudest sound would be the chirping of crickets at dusk. But Evelyn wasn't entirely alone in her newfound sanctuary. She shared her life with 2 silent, steadfast companions, Cain and Hera. They were cane corsos, an Italian breed of mastiff known for their intelligence, loyalty, and imposing presence. Cain, a brindle giant with a chest as broad as a barrel, was the stoic guardian. His eyes, dark and watchful, seemed to miss nothing. Hera, a sleek black female, was the strategist, her movements fluid and calculated. Together, they were more than pets, they were her family, her confidants, her living, breathing connection to a sense of security that had been frayed by years of war. She had raised them from pups, training them with the same gentle but firm discipline she had learned in the military. They responded to her quiet commands, to the slightest shift in her posture, with an almost telepathic understanding. The trouble began with a phone call. A concerned citizen, as the dispatcher would later term it, had reported a suspicious person in the neighborhood. The description was vague, yet pointed, a black individual in military-style clothing, seen patrolling the area. This patrolling was, in reality, Evelyn going for her evening walk with Cain and Hera, a routine as ingrained in her day as her morning coffee. She wore her old fatigues for comfort and durability, a tangible link to a part of her identity she was still learning to reconcile with her new, civilian self. That evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the horizon, Evelyn was in her front yard, engaged in a training exercise with her dogs. It was a game to them, a series of commands and rewards that kept their minds sharp and their bond with her strong. It was in the middle of this peaceful, familiar ritual that the first police car arrived. It didn't roll to a gentle stop. It skidded to a halt, its tires screeching on the asphalt, the sudden, violent sound a jarring intrusion into the evening's tranquility. Before Evelyn could fully process what was happening, a second car arrived, and then a third, boxing her in. Doors flew open, and officers emerged, their movements tense and hurried. Their guns were drawn, and they were all pointed at her. The scene was surreal, a disorienting blend of the mundane and the terrifying. One moment she was a veteran playing with her dogs in her own yard, the next she was the epicenter of a high-stakes police operation. "Get on the ground. Put your hands in the air." The commands were shouted, overlapping, creating a cacophony of aggression. Evelyn, her military training kicking in, reacted with a calm she didn't feel. She slowly raised her hands, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. "There's been a mistake," she said, her voice even. "I live here. My name is Sergeant Evelyn Reed." But her words seemed to be lost in the wind, swallowed by the escalating tension. The officers were advancing, a wall of blue and black and polished leather. Their focus was entirely on her, on the perceived threat she represented. They didn't seem to notice the two large, silent figures that had frozen at her side, their bodies coiled like massive springs. Kane and Hera had stopped their play the instant the first car arrived. They hadn't barked, they hadn't lunged. They had simply positioned themselves at Evelyn's flanks, their muscles bunched, their heads low. They were waiting. Watching. Assessing. It was a standoff that couldn't last. A nervous twitch of a finger, a sudden movement, a misunderstood command, any of these could have ignited the powder keg. It was in that moment of unbearable suspense that Evelyn, seeing the fear and aggression in the officers' eyes, realized they saw her as a threat, and by extension, her dogs would be seen as weapons. The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. She knew she had to de-escalate the situation, but she also knew that any sudden move on her part could be misinterpreted. As one of the officers began to inch closer, his voice a strained bark of commands, Evelyn made a decision. She couldn't rely on the humanity of the men in front of her, so she would rely on the discipline and intelligence of the animals at her side. In a voice that was barely a whisper, yet carried the unmistakable weight of command, she spoke a single word in Italian, a word she had drilled into her dogs since they were pups: seduto. Sit. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Kane and Hera, two formidable beasts who could have torn through the line of officers in a matter of seconds, sat down. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, a display of absolute obedience that was both breathtaking and deeply unsettling to the armed men surrounding them. They didn't break eye contact with the officers, but their posture was no longer one of coiled aggression. It was one of patient, unwavering vigilance. Then, Evelyn gave another quiet command, this one in English, her voice now carrying a resonance that seemed to cut through the fear-fueled adrenaline. "Watch." And this is where the dynamic of the standoff shifted in a way that no one could have anticipated. Kane and Hera, still seated, slowly, deliberately, turned their heads in unison. They were no longer looking at the officers. Instead, they were scanning the perimeter, their gazes sweeping over the yards, the houses, the street beyond the flashing lights. They were performing a threat assessment, a maneuver Evelyn had taught them, a way of focusing their protective instincts in a non-aggressive manner. The officers, who had been braced for a violent confrontation, froze. Their forward momentum ceased. They had been prepared for lunging, snarling beasts. They were not prepared for this display of calm, intelligent, and utterly disciplined behavior. They had come expecting a fight with a suspect. They found themselves in a silent, tense negotiation with two animals who seemed to possess more composure than anyone else on the scene. The fear in the officer's eyes began to be replaced by something else, confusion, and then a dawning, grudging respect. They were witnessing a level of training and control that was undeniable. The narrative they had constructed in their minds, of a dangerous individual with aggressive dogs, was crumbling before their very eyes. The silence that followed was broken not by a gunshot, but by the click of a safety being re-engaged on a service weapon. One of the officers, who seemed to be the ranking member on the scene, slowly lowered his gun. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands now open and visible. "Ma'am," he said, his voice still tense, but devoid of the earlier aggression. "Ma'am, what is going on here?" Evelyn, her own hand still raised, finally allowed a measure of the frustration she felt to seep into her voice. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," she said, her words clipped. "I live here. I'm a veteran. And these are my dogs. We were in our own yard." It was as if a spell had been broken. The other officers began to lower their weapons, their postures relaxing slightly. The immediate, life-or-death tension had dissipated, replaced by an awkward, heavy silence. The flashing lights continued their frantic, silent dance, but the sense of imminent danger had passed. In the end, it was the dogs who had de-escalated the situation. Their silent, unwavering discipline had spoken louder than any shouted command or desperate plea. They had demonstrated not a capacity for violence, but a capacity for restraint, a quality that had been sorely lacking in the human actors of this roadside drama. The aftermath was a flurry of apologies and justifications. The concerned citizen had apparently seen Evelyn's military-style clothing in her large, aggressive dogs, and had jumped to a conclusion fueled by prejudice and fear. The police, in turn, had responded with a show of force that was wildly disproportionate to the threat. Evelyn, while shaken, remained composed. She accepted the apologies with a quiet dignity, but she knew that this incident was a symptom of a larger problem. It was a stark reminder that for all her years of service, for all her sacrifices for her country, the color of her skin and the breed of her dogs could still make her a target in her own front yard. The story of Sergeant Evelyn Reed and her dogs, Cain and Hera, is more than just a tale of a misunderstanding that almost turned tragic. It is a powerful lesson in the nature of perception, prejudice, and the often unseen intelligence and emotional depth of the animals with whom we share our lives. In a moment of high-stakes tension, when human communication had broken down, it was the silent, disciplined actions of two cane corsos that bridged the chasm of fear and misunderstanding. They reminded everyone present that true strength lies not in aggression, but in restraint. They demonstrated a level of composure and intelligence that de-escalated a volatile situation, saving not only their own lives and the life of their beloved human, but also preventing the officers from making a tragic, irreversible mistake. This incident forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. It highlights the pervasive nature of unconscious bias and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate our actions. Sergeant Reed, a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting her country, found herself in a position where she needed protection in the one place she should have felt safest, her own home. And it was her dogs, often stereotyped as aggressive and dangerous, who became the unlikely peacemakers. Their actions challenge us to look beyond labels, beyond preconceived notions, and to see the individual, whether human or animal, for who they truly are. Cain and Hera were not weapons. They were guardians, and their greatest act of protection was not one of violence, but one of profound, unwavering peace. This story is a testament to the incredible bond between humans and animals, and a reminder that sometimes, the most important lessons are taught not through words, but through silent, steadfast loyalty. The world is full of stories like Evelyn's, stories that challenge our assumptions and open our eyes to the complexities of the world around us. If you believe in the power of these narratives, if you want to be part of a community that seeks to understand rather than to judge, then make sure you subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. And we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this story? Have you ever witnessed a moment where an animal's intelligence and composure changed everything? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your story could be the one that changes someone's perspective. Thank you for watching.